Just thirsty business giving you recommendations. Feel warm feelings and laugh. You might then want to read something that is about a female serial killer who takes revenge. And I would say if you're looking for something more light-hearted and heartwarming, and this one gets a little bit darker. Recommendations to get you out of Slump. Hello, and welcome to another bookish video from me, Johanna, me, my dog and books. Today, inspired by my friend Michaela, but also quite a few friends recently who are finding themselves in a reading slump. I'm not quite there yet. I've had a few meh books, but I'm not in a slump. But to prevent or to get us out of a slump, I thought I would share a whole host of books to help you get out of a slump. I'm going to do a selection of books from general fiction, historical fiction, thriller and horror. So I'll try and mark them so you can jump for any genres that aren't your bag. And hopefully out of all these books, 20 plus and more, you'll find one or two that hopefully can get you out of any sticky reading slumps. So grab yourself a cup of cha. I've got Indian chai. Oh, and I'm going to drop it and burn myself. No, it's okay. And a notepad. And let's start with general contemporary fiction. And the first one is Carrie Soto's Back by Jenkins Reid. Jenkins is an auto-buy author for me. This is one I think that both on, well, you can get it paperback now, and on audio is one of the best audiobooks I've ever listened to. It's like fully produced and there's a cast and it was amazing. So in this book we follow 37-year-old Carrie in the athletics world, that's old, and she decides to come out of retirement as a tennis champion. I have no big interest in tennis at all really, right? But this sucked me in. We follow Carrie as she basically comes out of retirement to be coached by her father for one more year to try and reclaim her title. The press, the media don't really like her. I think they deem her a battle axe. Her body's like, what? And so you have a whole journey through Carrie. Her relationship with her dad actually is really insightful. And a story about not letting you be defined by one accomplishment, but also don't let age stop you. That is a very short summary. Even if you don't watch or have any interest in tennis, don't let it put you off. I legitimately thought this was brilliantly written. The characterization was phenomenal, and it didn't matter that it was about tennis. How weird's that? I mean, if you love tennis, definitely read it. And then next up is one of my favourite book of 2023 is On the Savage Side by Tiffany McDaniel. If you've if you've watched any of my videos today, you may have heard me refer to both Tiffany McDaniel and this book. Tiffany McDaniel is an auto-buy author for me, and this book is phenomenal. It's actually inspired by the unsolved murders of the Chillicothe Six and follows the story of two sisters who could both be the next victims, Arcade and Daffy. They are twin sisters who are born 1 minute apart, and the two of them, like, they have fiery red hair and an innate desire to escape, and they have this unbreakable bond that's nurtured by their gran. Oh, what's her gran's name? She was an amazing character. She's one of my favourite characters. Anyway, so that's their kind of early years, and then years later, twin sisters wrestle with the memories of their early life as a local woman is discovered dead in the river, and soon more bodies come. It's kind of like it says in the book, like a fearless, is it elegy for missing women everywhere. Honestly, and this had me listening to a music track. Is it a Blondie track? I can't remember. But when you read it, you'll know why. And now when I listen to it, only ever makes me think of this book. Phenomenally written, my favourite book of 2023, and this is guaranteed to get you out of any slump. Next, it would be no book recommendation to get you out of reading Slump without a bit of a Fredrik Backman book. This was my first ever one. It's A Man Called Ove, and oh my. Firstly, I love elderly protagonists. And this one, you follow Ove, or is it Ove? Always Google it, I can't remember. It's Swedish, so I should know. He's a miserable, grumpy, but like weirdly lovable elderly man who is just angry at the world. He's still grieving the loss of his wife, and he's just like had enough. He swears at people, he's just not nice to anyone, but then strikes up an unexpected relationship with a young family that moved next door. This made me laugh and cry almost simultaneously. I also highly recommend the original Swedish version of the book, of the movie of the book, as well as A Man Called Otto. Is it Otto, the American one with Tom Hanks? That was pretty decent too, but wow, this will give you feelings. Another one that will make you feel warm feelings and laugh, The Rosie Project. I read this when it first came out years ago. I can't even remember when it came out. I should check, but I didn't. And we follow Dawn Tillman, who is socially awkward, and I can't remember if actually confirmed in the story or assumed to be on the spectrum. He's a science professor, and he looks at everything really scientifically and decides to approach romantic relationships in the same way. At this point in time, he's single and he's looking for love. And although I'm not someone that's into romance type books, this is the perfect one. And I just absolutely adored Dawn. He was just such a lovable character, and frustrating at times, but totally lovable. And I would say if you're looking for something more light-hearted and heartwarming, it's more of a comedy than a romance, check it out. And if you enjoy that, Dawn is like Dawn Tillman, I fell in love with for ages, and I was so excited that there were, is there 2 other books? There's The Rosie Effect, and I can't remember the last one, if there is only 3 after that. So then you have a few books to indulge in. And of the same ilk, but maybe with a slightly sadder element to it, is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gayle Honeyman. Scottish author, by the way. So we follow Eleanor, who at the start of the book you realise that she's been through some stuff in her life, and she's quite isolated, she's lonely, and she really struggles to, well, in some instances, leave the house and make friends and have relationships. So she's also like socially isolated, with a bit of a traumatic past that you start to unpick throughout the book. But she becomes enamoured by a singer whom she believes she's destined to be with. And although this doesn't sound like it starts out very well, I can confirm that you go on a wonderful journey with Eleanor, who is an amazing character, so well written, who has challenges in life, but you watch her go through a journey and a transformation to one of her own self and identity, and feeling more comfortable in her ownness. I don't know if that's a word. Honestly, like, I actually think I need to reread it because I don't think I've read it for a long time. And if you've already read this and you're like, oh yeah, I really liked it, but I'd like another book like that, there's Meredith Alone, which is of similar vibes, and I similarly love Meredith in that book as well, so definitely check it out. And that there is some general sort of contemporary fiction recommendations for you should you be feeling in a slump. And I appreciate some of those have been around for a while, and it's the same with some of the thriller recs, horror and historical fiction, because I like to do a mix of books where you can easily get hold of them as well. This is thirsty business, giving you recommendations. Or just any excuse to have a sip of my tea. It's delightful. So, next, thriller recommendations to get you out of slump. All of these books I'm recommending I've read and absolutely loved. I hence my recommendations. So first up is, it's a John Mars, and this one is The Marriage Act. So this sits in his, he writes 2 types of thrillers, sort of psychological thrillers, and then like speculative dystopian fiction, of which this one sits in the realm. So there are books before like that I've still not read. So the one which everyone tells me, Passengers? I can't remember. So sometimes there are Easter eggs in here, but I went in this not having read many of the ones before, so it's all cool, it's all good. The other scary thing about these thrillers is you read them and think, actually, this could actually happen. So this one is set in near future Britain, where we have a right-wing government who believes that the answer to society's ills is the sanctity of marriage. Marriage. So they obviously bring in the Marriage Act, which encourages marriage as the norm. So it encourages, so you get like, although in the UK we have the National Health Service, you get like top tier level of National Health Service, like the private element of it. We don't have a private health, but you know what I'm saying. So there's certain benefits that come with being married, but you also get monitored, kind of like if you have in your house or something like that that monitors you and your marriage, just in that like there'll be a trigger if it sounds like there's any issues, and then they'll send in, I can't remember the name of them, but they'll send in people to like spend time with you to sort out your marriage, right? Very, very Big Brother, very Black Mirror. I adored this. I consumed it as quickly as I possibly could, because in these books there's like multimedia excerpts, so there's like excerpts from web searches or news or leaflets, things like that. How the Marriage Act, how are smart marriages making Britain better? It's like government propaganda. Honestly, this is a wild ride. I absolutely adored it. And I would say like John Mars is a pretty, like you can pick up pretty much most John Mars books and absolutely have a great time. So if you've read this, check out The Family Experiment. And if you're looking for a really good John Mars thriller, I think one of my faves, more recent reads was Good Samaritan? Yeah, check that out. That's wild. That is more psychological thriller, it's not dystopian. So that there is The Marriage Act. Then something very different is an auto-buy author for me, another, and it is Riley Sager, and this one is Survive the Night. Now I'm going to give you an option after this one as well. Note to self. So in this one, it's like a, what do you call it? Like a isolated kind of thriller, because most of it's set in a car with about 2 characters. We follow a young woman called Charlie who is just dropped out of college after like her bestie was killed by a serial killer. So she's kind of looking for a lift home before the semester ends. Anyway, she's like, is anyone going whatever way? I can't remember where she's going. This guy, Josh, is like, yeah, I'll take you. So her and Josh end up in a bit of a road trip that starts late at night. So they're traveling a lengthy journey, and Charlie, obviously because of everything she's gone through and what's happened to her bestie, she starts to pick up discrepancies in Josh's story. And so in the car, she's starting to like plan her escape because she's convinced he is the campus killer. But she's also then convinced that Josh knows exactly what she's thinking. And this whole time you're like, I don't know. And then she's almost like gaslighting herself. She's like, maybe I'm just overthinking it. And then he's like, unreliable narrators, wild ride, pun intended. Yeah, some people, like, it's full of tropes. That's what Riley Sager's thrillers are, and I really enjoy them. If you have read this one, my favourite Riley Sager, which I would say errs between thriller and a wee bit horror because it's about haunted houses, is Home Before Dark. That was my first Riley Sager, and it is still one of my favourite. But I've thrown this one in because this is a good sort of do they call it locked room if you're not in a room? You're just in a car? I don't know, but I love this. I ate it up. Now, when you're reading a thriller that is about a woman who feels vulnerable and stuck in a car where she thinks there might be a serial killer, you might then want to read something that is about a female serial killer who takes revenge on the bad guys, and that is exactly what How to Kill Men and Get Away with It by Katie Brent is all about. We follow Kitty Collins, who is one of my favourite characters because she goes around putting an end to some of the nasty men out there. It reminds me, and I'm going to say this because I know there's a lot of people love the series Sweet Pea, by C.J. Clutes, can't remember. And I initially did enjoy that, but then I went to reread it last year, and I really struggled with the graphic. There's quite a lot of graphic, intimate scenes. And in this one, I would say this is, to me, a more palatable Sweet Pea. And I love Kitty Collins. It's dark. It gets, it is a bit brutal at times. So it is a bit of a dark thriller, but it makes me laugh out loud. I recognise so much of Kitty in me. Not that I go around killing men. But some of the thoughts she had about the horrible men in the world. And so, oh man, had so much fun with this. And now you can read book 2, which just came out this year. Was it January? I can't remember. Edit and me might know. Just came out this year. It's always forget. Would I look good in a coffin? Something like that. I'll put it here so you know. So then once you've read this and you really enjoy it, you can get into book 2. And apparently there's going to be a book 3. So I'm very excited about this. And this one gets a little bit darker. It's an oldie, but it's a goodie, and it's still one of my favourites. It's Night Film, and this is a dark mystery thriller. So basically it's a dark October night, and the body of Ashley Cordova, I think it is discovered in a Manhattan warehouse. The thing is, the fact her death is ruled as suicide, journalist Scott is not so sure and starts to investigate. But as Scott starts to investigate, he starts to unravel the world of Ashley's father, who is a renowned reclusive cult horror director who apparently hasn't been seen in public for is it 30 years? A long time. So suspicions start. So there seems to be stuff happening with this family. So the journalist Scott delves deep and dark into this mystery. I'm sure it gave me snuff movie vibes at sometimes, but there's also multi media in it, which I absolutely adored. And apparently Marisha Pessel has a new book, Something Darkly. Is it just called Darkly? I'll put it here. That's coming out later in this year, and I swear, after reading this, that is going on my auto-buy pre-order list. Next up is a really dark thriller of the Karen Slaughter, Jennifer Hillier. Both authors I also recommend, which follows a series. It's the Robert Hunter sort of detective series, but this is dark. If you've ever seen the movie Seven with Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt, that level of dark, really twisted. Now, the first in the series is a crucifix killer, right? It says it in the title. It's absolutely terrifying. A young woman's body is found in this derelict cottage in the middle of a national forest somewhere in America. She's naked and strung to 2 wooden posts, so and she's been sadistically tortured. I mean, I can't even describe on video what's done to this, right? So it's this level of dark. But man, Chris Carter pulls you in from page 1. His chapters are sharpy, snappy and short, and you literally consume it. And I think this is why it always says on the books, as addictive as a TV box set. Is apparently, anyway, back to the story. Apparently, the victim on the nape of their neck is they've carved I'm not sure whether it's a crucifix or what, which is the signature of the psychopathic this is what it says in the blurb, I'm not calling them a psychopath, the crucifix killer. So he starts to think, oh my god, there's a copycat killer. Anyway, that is the premise. It is dark, it is twisty. Don't read it if you don't like a lot of blood and guts, but wow, oh wow, it is no lie that these dark thrillers will get you out of a slump. However, right, I started in this one by accident because I picked it up at a charity shop. I don't even know if somebody recommended it, and it was a Night Stalker. Not the Night Stalker, but this is a different one. And in this one, we follow, unfortunately, another young woman's body is brought into the local morgue after she's been found dead, and there seems to be no marks on her apart from the fact intimate parts have been stitched up, right? So dark. But I would say I went in this, and obviously it's when you have Robert Hunter, who is the main detective, it was okay going into this the third number, but then I started to realise, oh, there's maybe bits about the detective that I want to know. So I got this, and then I've started, I think I have 9 of these now, but oh man, Chris Carter is up there. An auto-buy author, and one that I would love to meet. And one of the last thriller recommendations I'm going to give you is from a woman author, and it is Alice Feeney, and this one is Daisy Darker. This by far is still, look at the spreadsheets, this by far is still, I think, one of my favourite Alice Feeney's. I've still got some of her back catalogue to read, and I have just read Beautiful Ugly, which I also highly recommend. That was great, twisty thriller. This one is set on the cusp of Halloween, and we've got a family who come together on like an isolated, it's like a peninsula where like certain times, like for 8 hours of the day, the water comes in, you're kind of isolated off and can't go anywhere. And they all gather for the grandmother's 80th birthday. And it's Halloween, so you know, if you're a seasonal reader, definitely. But like, I would just read it now, anytime, if you're wanting to get out of a slump. Anyway, Daisy Darker is one of the characters, but the Darker family haven't been together in the one place for about a decade. And as with this little place off the, is it Cornwall coast, tide comes in or out, whatever way it comes, where they're basically isolated on this island, and then people start to die. Because when the tide goes back out, they realise one of them is a killer. Oh, this was just so good. Can't recommend it enough. I adored this. I got an e-arc of it, I think, originally, so I read it on my Kindle, and then as soon as it was possible to get my hands on it, and I think I'm likely to give this a reread this year because it's still one of my favourites. But also Beautiful Ugly, another one, if you've already read this, definitely recommend. And it's out now. So that there are thriller recommendations to get you out of slump. Next up, historical fiction, and I'm leaving horror to last. Tea sip time. So the first book in sort of historical fiction that I think that would get you out of reading slump is a book that has 2 of my favourite characters. We have Elizabeth Zott and 630. You will find out who the character is, and it is Lessons in Chemistry. I first read this as an e-arc years ago before it came out, and then it blew up when it actually came out. Right, there's so many books, I never managed to get the spreadsheet ones. But anyway, I bought this because when it came out, I think I pre-ordered it. I can't remember, it was that good. When you read an ebook and then you're like, I need to own it. So this is set in the 1950s. In the misogynistic world where, I mean, we're still in, anyway, in a misogynistic world where Elizabeth, God forbid, can't be a scientist, surely. And her partner both work in the same sector. Of course, she's a woman, so she has to deal with everyday misogyny. But then things happen. I'm not going to go into it, don't want spoilers, but at some point she gets offered a cooking show where she realises she can use her science to explain the joy of cooking. And she comes to a TV screen near you. That's because, like, prior she'd been fired as a chemist because, you know, women doing science. So we follow Elizabeth, and there's also a dog called 630, but I'll not give them their backstory. But a delightful character. And oh my god, I loved Elizabeth. poignant, emotional, warm, funny. And she is like 1950s feminist where she's just pushing boundaries. But shit happens to her and you just watch her as she journeys through all of that. I utterly adored it. I know I think it's an Apple, I don't know, Prime maybe? It doesn't matter. There's a TV adaptation. I've never watched it because I've heard good things about it, but I have to say, I love this so much that sometimes I just don't want the characters to be portrayed out with my own head. But I absolutely adored this. There's so many feelings in this kind of book, but kind of like a man called Uwe, or what was the other ones I've maybe recommended? Yeah. On that ilk. Thought it was phenomenal. And you could probably get it, well, you will be able to get it in paperback now. Now, I cannot recommend historical fiction books. Not all of her books that she writes are historical fiction. Or maybe they are. But anyway, I can't recommend without recommending Kristen Hanna. And here is one of many of her books I absolutely enjoyed. This one is Four Winds. As you can see, I still have where I've marked this book. Well, and this one is set in the Dust Bowl era, which was in the 1930s America, one of the darkest periods during the Great Depression. So I didn't know anything about this, and this was also a history lesson for me. But it's a portrayal of America and the American dream through the eyes of our main character, Elsa. And she has a husband and 2 kids. And they are going through the inequality, the deprivation, poverty of this era. She wakes up one morning and her husband is gone. She now has the responsibility of getting them through this really dark period in American history. Well, I mean, not as dark as other periods. So she is there. So it's a wonderful showcase of mother and daughter relationships, of female courage, of female friendship as well, but also like the decisions that Elsa has to make about her family. Do you stay and fight for the land, or does she uproot them and try and move to a better place for them? So powerful, so emotive, so amazingly written. I think there might have been tears. Next up is another Taylor Jenkins read. I think it might be the only one that I've mentioned twice in this list, can't remember. Anyway, this one is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. If you've not read this yet, please do. We follow 79, or she's nearly 80, Hollywood icon Evelyn Hugo, who decides she's finally ready to tell her story. And so she invites like a totally unknown journalist, Monique, I think it is. Yep, to write her story. And then no one is more astounded than Monique herself. So Evelyn starts to tell her story of making her way in Hollywood in the 50s and her journey through her career, and of course her 7 husbands, each of which has its own story. It's a story about ruthless ambition, unexpected friendships, forbidden love, and you learn why Evelyn chose Monique to tell her story. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. I think I've maybe read this twice already. I'm sure I've read it in print and then also in audio. Highly recommend in audio. Then next is a book I read years ago, and I always keep an eye out, and I do think I need to get a paper copy of it because I don't know what I did with my original copy. It's A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. So this is an oldie. It originally came out in 1940 something. So I read this a number of years ago for my In Real Life book group, and it's one that I just always hark back to and remember. It's a bit chunky, it's nearly 500 pages, but please don't let that put you off. It was a delight reading and spending every minute on this one. Basically a kind of young girl's coming of age story at the turn of the century. We follow, now I've always called her Francie in my head, and when I've read it, I don't know if it's Frankie, I can't remember, it's Francie. So we follow Francie, who's born into a world of poverty with immigrant parents. And so you follow her life growing up in pretty much what was deemed the slums of, is it Williamsburg borough? Where she grew up. She's sensitive and she's idyllic and an idealist, and she dreams, and so you follow her as she goes through education and her journey through her effectively a coming of age. We also follow her family, the Nolans, so it's Francie Nolans, and everything that around all of that. Basically follow all the obstacles that she has to go through in life at this time, at this period. And actually, now that I think back on it, it's probably worth a reread, given like everything that's going on in the world. I mean, basically it's a story of, which is kind of sad too, about surviving your poor immigrant background and getting out of poverty and going through education. It really shone a light on second generation immigrants living in poverty in America. And then obviously when this came out, it would have been 40s. So it was shining a light on immigrant voices at that time. And it was so amazingly written. I think there's movie and TV adaptations. I've never seen them. Again, it's one of those ones where I so loved the book. I really need to get a copy. Anyway, highly recommend. Next is also an oldie. It's Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe. I've read this 3 times and I've watched the movie about similarly amount of times. Now, when did this first come out? 1987. That doesn't seem that long ago, but it is. It's set in Alabama and it weaves together two connected stories, one in kind of the present and one in the past. So we have Evelyn, who's like a middle-aged housewife who is visiting Ninny, who's in an old folks home, a nursing home. And Ninny starts to share her story of her life. And her story involves 2 other women, tomboy Idgie and her bestie Ruth, back in the 1930s. They both ran a little cafe called Whistle Stop in Alabama. They offered good coffee, southern barbecue, all kinds of love, laughter, and sometimes a bit of murder. And as the past unfolds through Evelyn's storytelling, it realises the presents will never be the same again. So you can imagine, back in the day, there's, it's the 30s, so marginally more racist than nowadays. But you have segregation, you have all of that going on. So set in the 30s and then probably I think the 80s, when you've got these 2 different timelines. Oh my God, the characters are amazing. The stories are amazing. And actually sometimes now when I watch the movie, all I can see when I'm reading the book is the characters from the movie. I think in the movie it is it Kathy Bates? The one who was Annie in Misery. And so she plays the middle-aged housewife, and Evelyn, who's Evelyn, and Ninny, who's in the nursing home, is played by the actor who played the elderly lady in Driving Miss Daisy. And then the other 2 you'll recognise. I can't remember when the movie came out. It must have been the 90s if the book's in the 87. It has my heart. It has my heart. I love it. I highly recommend it. Last but not least, one of my favourite genres, horror. If you're looking for horror to get you out of reading slump, here are some of my recommendations. Well, firstly, I cannot not mention Tender as the Fresh by Augustina Masterica. My favourite book of 2020, I think, or 2021. Whenever I read it, it was my favourite book. Still one of my favourite horrors. It's still that one that I will force into the hands of people that don't mind a lot of blood and cannibalism. We live in a world where, for some reason I can't remember, is it some virus or illness that like humans just can't eat animal meat anymore. So as opposed to just become veggie, we decide to farm human meat, because that's what humans do. That's where you follow Marcus, who works in a meat processing plant that farms human meat. He's not living a great life. His wife's left him. His dad's sinking into dementia. And he's also trying not to think too hard about how he makes a living. But then one day he's given a live specimen, which is obviously another human being. And you're not supposed to get into any sort of human sort of personal contact. But day by day, he starts to treat her like an actual human being. This is dark. It makes your skin crawl. It's icky in the best kind of horror way. And oh my God, this is made Augustina Basterica, a not by author for me. She also has this book, which is a selection of short stories, 19 Claws and a Blackbird, which I also highly recommend. And she has a new book coming out next March, the March coming, called The Unworthy, which I'm in the middle of reading because I kindly managed to get an art from Pushkin Press and I am loving it. But this, I can't confirm if I love it as much as this yet because I've not finished it. But wow. Next is also one of my favourite books. It came out, it was actually my top 3 books of 2023. It's The Reformatory by Tanana Reeve Dhu. Right. I'm going to show you something and don't let it put you off. It's a chonky one, right? Chonky books scare me. I can't help it. But Stephen King does it all the time, so I have to just suck it up and go with it. But I swear to God that this book does not feel like a chonk. You go in and it sucks you right in. It's set in Jim Crow era in Florida, 1950s Florida. You can already feel the atmosphere, the heat, the racism. And we follow 12-year-old Robert Stevens Jr., who, for a totally trivial scuffle with a white boy, it was the white boy's fault, he's sent to Gracetown School for Boys. The segregated reformatory is an absolute chamber of horrors, as Robert gets haunted by all the boys who've died there before. This, I mean, you think the ghosts of the dead boys is a terrifying part. It's also how, like, Robert himself is treated as a young black boy in this reformatory, which is actually based on Tanana Reeve Dhu's, is it your great uncle? One of her family members who was sent to a similar type reformatory that actually existed, which was horrific for young boys, and where boys of colour, or kids of colour, I don't know, but they're probably girls too, who knows, but it was tragic. You also have in this story, is it Robin? Robert has a sister who is not much older than him, but is desperate to get him out of the reformatory, so that relationship's happening behind the scenes. Oh my God, like, I've read this and then since had about all Tanana Reeve Dhu's books put on my wish list, and I've got one to read, which I'm going to be reading this year. This blew me away, and it's the kind of horror where it's not like Tender as the Flesh, it's not as gory or about cannibalism. It is, the horror is not only just in the ghosts of the boys who have died in this reformatory before, but of the horrors of life in Jim Crow Florida in the 1950s and what happened to young black boys, and actually probably alludes to the horror of nowadays. Phenomenal. The next one's not a new one, it's a classic from the 70s. It is, well, could I let this list go by without mentioning a Stephen King? No, of course not. It's The Shining by Stephen King. Classic, still one of my favourites. It's even sun bleached, look at the spine. Not one of my favourite covers, but I bought this years ago. I still can't remember why there's a bee or a wasp on the front. Does anyone know? That is either showing me to be a really bad fan of The Shining, or like, let's just blame my memory. So, of course, we could Jack Torrance, who moves his family to the Overlook Hotel. Yeah. Over in the, I think it was filmed in Colorado. Anyway, it's winter time. And Jack has decided that during this time he'll write a book because he's an aspiring writer, and his family, his wife and his son Danny are there. And Danny has a site. He has a site called The Shining where he's able to see things, or I'll quote, or as we say in the words of Mr. Halloran. Why can't I say his name? He's like one of the main characters. He is a shiner. A glow with psychic voltage. Anyway, winter closes in. The Overlook Hotel gets blizzard, snowed in. Nobody can go there, but like he's just like, Jack is just the caretaker. It's basically him and his family. But the hotel seems to develop a life of its own, and Jack, we think, is losing his mind. And stuff seems to be happening in this hotel. Who's the woman in room 217? Oh, that scene. I can't ever get it out of my head. Like, even when I read the book, I see the scene from the film. Anyway, somehow, there's an evil force in the hotel. It goes down. If you've not read it, actually, if you've only ever seen the movie, highly recommend reading it. Because I think that is how... I can't actually remember. No, I think it is how I experienced it. I think years ago, I saw the movie and then I read the book, because I was always like, what's the point in reading a book if you've seen it? That's a whole other drama, because Stephen King did not like what he did to the movie. What was the director's name? Ed and me put it in, I can't remember. They had beef. Anyway, it's all over now, but there's so much that is explained in this book. Well, not explained. There's so much that's told in this book that it explains a lot of the things that you see in the film, which you're like, why did that happen? Why did we see those people in animal masks? This still creeps me out. No matter how many times I reread it and watch the movie, I'll watch the movie at least once a year. I need to give this another reread. Terrifying. Just all classic. Absolute classic. Then we have another auto-buy author. It is Grady Hendrix, and this one is the Southern Book Club Guide to Slaying Vampires. Grady brings satire and terror at the same time, horror and humour. And in this one, we follow is a book club in the it's set in the 90s, right, in the South, where there's all these women who have their own book club. And we follow Patricia, who's in this book club. Her life's never felt smaller. Her husband's a workaholic. She's stuck at home. She's got teenage kids who are never around. Her senile, are you allowed to say senile now? Her not very well elderly mother, who she's just in constant care of. And so it's only her close-knit book group that is actually keeping her sane. And this book group only read true crime, because these Charleston women love true crime books. But then a new person comes into the neighbourhood, James, and he wants to join. He wants to join said book club. There's something funny about James. Yeah, James managed to make these women feel like they've never felt before. Like noticed and important. But, like I said, James is sus. But as he wants to join the book club, and also because these women are in a true crime book club, they can't quite decide if James is the town's Brad Pitt or frickin' Ted Bundy. Stuff ensues. I'll not go. There is a scene in the attic here that, literal skin crawl. It is amazing though. And Grady Hendrix does an amazing job of making social commentary about women in the 90s in the South and the misogyny around that and the expectations of women. Is so cleverly done. This is still one of my favourites and I devoured it. Pun intended. Next up is from almost an auto-buy author for me. It's Christina Henry, and this was the first one of hers I read. It's Near the Bone, and it is very much a really good seasonal horror. So if you're currently in winter, give this a read. So we follow, it's isolated settings because we're up in the mountains in a cabin sort of idea, but we follow Mattie, who's a wonderful woman. She's a great character, but she's terrified. She can't remember a time where she didn't live in the mountains with her husband William, but she knows one thing: she must never upset William. No one likes William when he's angry, and especially Mattie. So there is the premise of their relationship. It is dark and twisted. I just felt an overwhelming sense of dread reading this book, and that's because you're in Matty's head a lot of the time, kind of waiting for her, and that when there's obviously the relationship is coercive and abusive behaviour, so you always feel that level of tenseness. But he is not the only monster in the mountains, let's just say, that Matty has to survive. And this is brutal. There's lots of trigger warnings given Matty's relationship with William and also other stuff, so please do check this out. But the setting, the isolated winter, the darkness, the dread, the intense terror, this woman is trapped in the mountain with an abusive husband and something else. It literally gave me the chills and I inhaled it. I hope you're still here. I've got 2 more books to tell you in the horror department. But it's time for, I keep having a hair that falls and so apologies, I need to stop touching my hair. Yeah, a wee tea break. So the penultimate recommendation is, where have we got it? You can see how organised I am for this. I have got a list written down, just haven't got the book sorted. It is The Last House in Needless Street by Carrie Ward. This came out in 2022. And it was my top read of 2022, just let you know that. So this is a hard book to tell people about because the less you know going in, the better. But also know going in that for 3/4 of it, you will not have a clue what's going on, and that is okay. It will pay off, I promise. So, to take it from the sort of blurb, this is a story of a serial killer. Stolen child, revenge, death, and a little house. Very ordinary, and sits at the end of a very ordinary street. These things are true, yet they're all lies. Yes. Are you as confused as I was reading this book? By just even the synopsis alone? Of course you are, because this book is a mind F-U-C-K. You have, now, do we have different POVs? We have different POVs in this book. We have POVs that we don't know which is reliable and what's telling us what, and literally you go through most of this book going, I don't know what's happening, and so you ultimately don't believe what's in the last house in Needless Street. Just take my recommendation here. She's now, after reading this book, she's now an auto-buy author for me. I will literally buy every book that she writes. Not one of her books. So I would say Sundial came a close second, but is very different. And no book so far for me has topped The Last House in Needless Street. Obviously came out in 2022. So, oh no, 2021, sorry. So it was my favourite book of 2021. I think, was it 2021 here or 20? I don't know, but it came out a couple of years ago, so you can get it in paperback, you can get it on ebook, get it out of your library. Highly recommend. But just don't come for me if you're halfway through going, I have no idea what's going on. It's okay, it's okay. None of us did. But the payoff at the end is worth it. Chef's kisses. Last but not least, probably is a book that's on the cusp of psychological thriller and horror. So I would say it's a relatively accessible horror. I deemed it horrific. I would call it horror. But it's not gore per se. It's more of horror of the mind. And that is Bird Box by Josh Malerman. Even if you've watched the film, read the book. It is phenomenal. So obviously we enter a world where the internet has died, TV's stopped working, radios have gone silent. Something is out there, something that should not be seen. And if you glimpse it, you are immediately driven to deadly violence. One knows what it is or where it came from. Okay, if you've seen the film, you know the gist. But either way, we're kind of 5 years later from the outset of whatever's just happened to the world where these things are there and you can never look at them. And Mallory and her 2 young children are living in an abandoned place and surviving in this world. This is that story. And, oh, the tension, the terror. It is Obviously, the movie adaptation is amazing, but the book is phenomenal. And if you've read this and you're like, yeah, I already know about that, have you read book 2, which is called Mallory? It's, in my opinion, not quite as top tier as Bird Box, but amazing return to that world, and I loved it. Plus, Mallory's a pretty good character, in my opinion. I would say, in all, a great psychological horror that is creepy, intense, and keeps you on edge the whole time. So that there, friends, is my book recommendations to get you out of a reading slump, across genres: historical fiction, general contemporary fiction, horror and thrillers. So hopefully amongst all of those recommendations you find something that can get your mojo back if you've lost it and you need it, or if you're just looking for some goddamn good books. Goodness. Let me know if you've read any of them. Let me know what books you recommend to people when they're in a reading slump, because we all need them, and me and friends in the comments will love them. Let's chat in the comments about what books you've read, what you would recommend, and if you've enjoyed this video and like to see more, let me know. Don't forget to subscribe, ding 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 ding. And thank you as always for liking, for commenting, and for watching, spending your time with me chatting books. So let's carry on the chitter chatter in the comments, and I'll see you in another bookish video very soon. Bye!